Hello, lovely people.
Hello.
There's a little bump there. I don't know. That audio and that trailer sounded really tinny. Welcome, and welcome to the 19th Female Eye Film Festival. We are live streaming to YouTube. And so the feed for the questions is coming in from the 19th Female Eye Film Festival playlist on YouTube. And I really thank you, Robin, for coming in. You're a special guest, and Carol Whiteman, obviously, Dr. Carol Whiteman, who is the co-creator, producer of Women in the Director's Chair, WIDC, and executive producer, WIDC Feature Film Award. And we have Robin Smith, and we have Blue Eye Stocks, KINO Smith Inc., and we are so happy to have you here. And I'm not going to take up a lot of airspace. I'm just going to step away, and I am going to be in the background. So, Carol, you're good?
We're good.
All right.
Thank you, Leslie Ann. And welcome, Robin. Thank you so much for joining this conversation today.
My pleasure.
I just want to acknowledge that I'm here in Vancouver, British Columbia, which is the unceded and traditional territories of the Coast Salish people, the Musqueam, the Tsleil-Waututh, and the Squamish nations, and I'm grateful to be a settler on these lands. So I just want to acknowledge that, and welcome you to this conversation about, well, it's called Content in Review, but I think our conversation is more of a landscape, content of the landscape, if you will, of our industry, and where distribution is headed, where it's at, and all of those sorts of things. So it's going to be a bit of a deep dive, if you will, into what our options are and what's coming down the pipeline in terms of how we can reach our audiences with content these days in this new landscape that's sort of emerged from the pandemic and was edging into view even before the pandemic. So we'll talk about those things, and we have 90 minutes to fill this space and to have a wide-ranging conversation. And I would like to invite questions from our audience and recognize that the Female Eye Film Festival audience is filled with folks who are emerging, mid-career. They're based in Ontario, they're based across Canada, and we have international filmmakers as well who are part of our audience. And so I want to acknowledge that they are writers, directors, producers, sometimes they're actors, editors. They come from all portions of our industry. So if we can keep that in mind in our conversation with all those multiple hyphenates that'll be in our audience, we welcome your questions, audience, and Leslie Ann and the team will flash those on the bottom of our screen so that we can address those as they come up in the conversation. And we'll kind of try to keep the last 30 minutes mainly to Q&A, but I've sent you a list of pre-questions, Robin, and hopefully you've had a chance to digest them and think of what you'd like to say to this first question. And this is, I like to just sort of set the tone. What is the pathway that you've taken to where you are now, Blue Eye Stocks, KINO Smith, and what do you love about what you do? So that's a big, broad, wide-ranging question. So over to you to.
Yeah, no, for sure. And thank you, Leslie Ann and everyone at the Female Eye Festival for inviting me. And thank you, Carol, for this conversation. And obviously, thank you to anyone who is watching and participating in this conversation. I certainly do not pretend to know all the answers. I don't think anyone knows the answers of what is, what is the current state of our marketplace and what will come post-pandemic, which seems still very distant at this point. But yeah, I mean, just to give some context, I mean, I'm based here in Toronto, Canada. I'm a Canadian distributor. We focus almost exclusively on nonfiction feature-length product. The two companies are KINO Smith and Blue Eye. It's a little confusing. They're both distribution companies. They're not technically married, but they both live under the same roof. Blue Ice Docs is run by myself and Neil Tabasnik. We also do production. We do financing at that company. And KINO Smith is my baby that I started about 18 years ago. It's still active, but tends to get more involved in Canadian productions. And Blue Ice gets more involved in international productions. We distribute films across all media, which I guess pre-pandemic was historically in cinemas and on VOD to broadcasters, educators, where possible DVD, wherever DVD still existed. You know, I guess backing up to March of 2020, when everything closed down, we were in the process of releasing 3 films that month in cinemas. The very first one was called The Booksellers, a great documentary about independent booksellers based in New York. We were 3 days into the release when cinemas all closed down. And we were following that with a great movie by Canadian filmmaker Young Chang called This Is Not a Movie, and another film, and forgive me for not remembering what it is, but it all seems so far away right now, but all 3 films, obviously, we had to stop immediately, you know, cancel all in-cinema screenings. And I think myself, like many other people, you know, when the first closures and shutdown and being asked to be at home and not cut your hair, etc., happened, you know, it was, I like to refer to it as I was in airplane mode. You know, I think I turned everything off, my Wi-Fi, everything. I was a bit numb, not knowing where things were going. And you know, that's probably true for people who don't even work in our industry. I think everyone was really confused, numb, concerned, slightly panicked. That lasted for about 3 weeks, maybe at max, before, you know, business as usual had to sort of go forward. I mean, we made promises to our filmmakers and to the rights holders to release our films. Obviously, during lockdown, it proved more so than ever before that people were dying, it may be wrong word, let's say urgently in need of content to keep themselves entertained and educated along the way. But how can that content go to people when it was earmarked to go to cinemas? You know, so we, lucky enough, we're a small enough company in Canada that we, you know, can pivot a little bit. And we sort of looked south of the border to see what some of the other companies in the States were doing. And the big thing was sort of virtual cinema to start off with, which was, you know, digitally screening the films and getting exhibitors involved to help promote it. So we were actually the first company in Canada to start our own virtual cinema program. Ironically, I reached out to other Canadian distributors to see if they'd want to team up to create a unified screening portal. And unsurprisingly, each of them wanted to sort of wait and see, or they had their own plans. So we sort of pushed forward for better or for worse, and we started Documentary Online Cinema, our own screening platform. And as of April 24th, we released not only Young Chang's film, The Booksellers, but we started launching a screening program with exhibitors where we exclusively made the content, you know, provided to cinemas and their patrons. We worked out a deal that they would not have to pay for any of this. We would pay for it all, take some of the costs off top, and then split revenues 50-50 down the road. We all kind of understood that this wasn't necessarily going to be a huge barn burner, money-making, you know, venture, but it was about creating some cash flow. It was about, once again, getting the films to audiences, and it was about engaging those audiences. And more specifically to exhibitors, cinema owners, it was also showing to their audiences that they can be innovative and also pivot at the same point in time. I'm not sure, you know, there's so many stats going on about how virtual cinema is working, not working.
Mm-hmm.
I'm also lucky enough to work with Hot Docs, and I programmed their cinema, the Hot Docs Ted Rogers Cinema here in Toronto, which also closed down that weekend. And, you know, as conversations and Hot Docs started about doing virtual as well, and we were doing virtual, you know, we all realized that the numbers were not going to replace theatrical. The revenue in general is about 15 to 20% maximum of what you could achieve theatrically. but certain expenses and costs dropped a little bit. You know, you were no longer shipping DCPs or digital hard drives of films around. Your promotions and advertising were a little bit more focused and specific, and dare I say, we were spending a lot more time doing social media advertising than we were more traditional grassroots marketing. But you know, by the end of it, I say, knowing there's an end, there still is an end. We're still doing virtual screenings to this day, but cinemas are starting to reopen, and we're doing sort of a hybrid of both. You know, I think it really has taught everyone in our industry that the traditional model, whatever people want to refer to as, let's say going to cinemas for a 90-day exclusive before going to digital platforms, is maybe, you know, flexible and should be flexible going forward. And, you know, it's interesting for us because a lot of the films that we acquire and release tend to skew to an older demographic, older meaning 45 plus. You know, they are, and this is a huge, you know, well, I'll just say it for what it is. I mean, an older demographic isn't necessarily the most digital savvy in the world. So asking people who normally would go to the cinema and buy a ticket and sit in the seat and eat popcorn to suddenly turn on their computer, go to app A or B or C and stream a movie, we knew was not going to be a long-term goal or solution to this. And in a weird sort of way, also even focused on the type of films that we might be acquiring going forward. Not to say that we're turning a back on that, but it's opened our eyes to tapping into, I guess, alternative demographics that we normally wouldn't do just based on our business model. And once again, I don't want to say that we're going to turn our back on an older demo. We're not. But would I have gone out and bought a documentary called Bread, the Everyday Miracle, about sourdough starters and making your own bread during the pandemic? Probably I wouldn't have done that, except I kept seeing online that everyone was making their own bread during the pandemic, including myself. So I sort of, you know, try to pivot some of our acquisitions accordingly as well. I'm not sure how it's all going to end. I don't think anyone does. You know, I hope, and my fingers and toes are crossed, that cinemas will survive. I know we've already had some casualties here in Canada. I know internationally the same way. Whether it's a film festival or a brick and mortar exhibition venue, they are struggling. And I know there is incentives, there's government grants, and a variety of community events that are helping out. But we can't forget that as the summer months roll in and everyone wants to be outside, that we have to support some of these avenues and ventures, not just the local bar and restaurant, but also, you know, the brick and mortars of our neighborhoods.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so much to unpack with what you've just sort of outlined for us, Robin, in terms of the, you know, the unfolding of the discovery through the pandemic, the beginning days of the pandemic, and sort of what you've pivoted towards: potential collaboration, online distribution. Could you talk, I just want to just do a little drop in on the role of festivals, because of course that's something that has really evolved over the last 12 months. And each festival in the sequence of rollouts of our festival calendars have learned from the last. And in terms of how we work with festivals in the landscape of getting content out to audiences, what's your sort of assessment of what we've learned over the year of festivals this year?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, I'll back up even prior to pandemic. You know, festivals to me are such a key component to any film release strategy. Small films, large films, doesn't matter. To me, festivals have become part of the business model of distributing a film. And I'll be frank, I mean, any festival that tells a filmmaker or a rights holder that they're sort of a nonprofit venture, I would highly disagree. You know, it's a venue that screens movies, often for paid ticketing event, and you know, you are getting awareness in public, you know, eyes on your film, sometimes even before people know of your film. So festivals to me are such a key component. When they stopped physical screenings and went virtual. I remember, I think the very first festival that I was supposed to attend was CPH Docs in Copenhagen, which is an amazing documentary festival. They were the first ones I experienced that sort of pivoted and went completely digital. There's pros and cons. I think the con is always not being at the market, not being able to literally rub shoulders with other colleagues in the industry or buyers that you want to strike deals with or sales agents that you potentially want to buy films from is kind of problematic. And replacing and replicating that kind of social environment, no matter how you look at it, just doesn't work online. I don't know how many people have tried to do a happy hour online and it doesn't work. Holding up a glass to a computer screen and cheering people in Zoom windows, it just can't be replicated. But that being said, what I actually thought was better than being in person were the pitches. And often I go to festivals not only to see films that are competing in the festival or being exhibited in the festival, but I go to listen to pitches, projects that are in development or in production or in post-production. And most festivals have an industry component that, brings what they refer to as decision makers in to meet the filmmakers and hopefully provide interest, aka, funds for that film to get completed. Mm-hmm. Historically, these are done in very stoic, stale settings in a very crowded room with literally hundreds of other people, and the noise pollution is horrible. I'm a bit of a germaphobe by heart anyway, so the amount of handshaking and Purell that went on my hand even pre-pandemic was, pretty heavy duty. But there was also the ability when all of this ported online, there was, strangely enough, a more intimate environment. And it was a more focused environment. Mm-hmm. And to me, it was immediately, the documentation wasn't this physical documentation that I'd have to put in a knapsack and carry around with me. It was email immediately that would follow with PDFs and so forth. Forum pitching, anytime there was pitching, it's hard sometimes, even in the best non-jet lagged, day, to keep your eyes open 4 hours into pitches. But when it's sort of separated and you're in your own environment, beyond from the time zone differences, depending on where the pitches are coming from, you can actually focus a little bit more. So I sort of feel that hopefully the festivals sort of see that a lot of industry components actually work quite well digitally. Watching movies is still difficult, for me, seeing how in festival audiences, I always take with a caveat, they're a little different than normal audiences, but seeing how a film plays to a live audience, there's nothing better than that. I mean, for the filmmakers, for potential buyers, for investors, whatever the case may be, that is, one would hope that's why we get involved in films, is to see that, that reaction and communicate directly with an audience. So not having that physical salon for filmmakers to meet the audience and talk about their film afterwards, for me to eavesdrop on hearing what people are saying as they're walking out, to me it was just, kind of destroyed me, because I'm a huge passionate lover of the cinema setting, and nothing can replace that virtually, sadly. The other thing that was also difficult was just, timing, my schedule. Like all people, usually when you go to a festival, you sort of schedule out your meetings with your screenings, etc. Because the screenings are kind of virtual and can be had at any point in time, I always found I put them off. And then before you know it, I couldn't see it because the festival had ended and I hadn't caught up. Ironically, geo-blocking becomes a big issue. I just ran into this with, South by in the States, as well as Doc NYC, where, here I was an industry person. I go to these festivals or, attend these festivals to see what content's there. I couldn't watch 90 to 95% of the content because it was geo-blocked for the Americans directly and could not bleed the border, which I get. But suddenly that became really problematic for me as a buyer to go in there looking for new product. So once again, pros and cons. I mean, hopefully every festival has sadly gone through the ringer of doing a virtual festival already. And I think, well, we're in the month now where we're starting to see repeats. And I, just got my invites for places like Docs Barcelona and CPH Docs once again, and Hot Docs, of course. And it's kind of the second time around virtually, so I kind of know what to expect a little bit, but I'm also kind of excited on some of the wrinkles that sort of came out of it being smoothed over. And I think everyone's now a little bit more attuned to being able to present to a computer versus live faces. So,
yeah, that's a lot of pros and cons. And I wonder, Robin, can you talk about, just to go back to the actual screening portion, because there's the industry portion of festivals that's very important, but the actual platform for presenting films, the content, and reaching an audience. Could you speak about, and this is probably instructive to our audience too, the importance of the curation and the relationships that you need to develop with the programmers at these festivals in a different way, perhaps, than you might if you were attending in person or developing relationships in the pre-pandemic times?
Yeah, I mean, I know quite a few programmers, festivals around the world, and they all, I think in their first year, had a real big hill decline because, for better or for worse, some studios or filmmakers or rights holders decided not to release their films or pull them from festivals. And I get it. I mean, to be frank, we had 5 films going into Hot Docs last year, and I had a conversation with each group of those filmmakers to just make a decision on what they wanted to do. And to be frank, it wasn't my decision. It was really their decision. I sort of look at it as filmmakers being the parents, and it's their baby. I'm a babysitter, for lack of a better way of putting it. Sales agents are more like midwives, So if you sort of look at that role, it's not my decision to make in regards to competing or otherwise. But you're going into year 2, and how long can you sit on these films before, quote unquote, they become old? So for programmers, I know that they really ran into a tough situation where normally it would be either carte blanche or a very large swath of product to choose from. Suddenly that product became more condensed and fewer. So I think you see in a lot of the festivals, their programming content dropped significantly. And that made sense. But on a pro side, what this virtual has done, because what is happening virtually is transactional VOD, essentially. It's not theatrical. That is, we're in the digital realm. And that opens a different Pandora's box in regards to rights and so forth. But, it opened up a dialogue with a lot of festivals in regards to fairly compensating filmmakers and rights holders in regards to screening fees. And that's been a huge bone to pick that I've had with festivals around the world. There are the big festivals that will remain nameless that, will never pay you a fee. You should just be happy to be part of their festival and put a laurel leaf on your poster. Yet they sell tickets for $30, $40 a pop. And where does that revenue go to? Not, in some cases, not one dime goes to the filmmakers. That to me has always been a real big issue. But when you get into the transactional VOD land, you can fight for your rights a little bit more. And in a lot of cases, the festivals were a lot more fair in compensating because it was new for them, and they also needed content very quickly. So some of the more stoic, larger festivals kind of, excuse the phrase, sort of dropped their pants a little bit and decided, okay, we're going to offer some revenue to you to try to attract even more films. So I think that was an interesting scenario for programmers as well. I can't necessarily prove this, but I would assume that they wooed some films to their festival because there was suddenly financial compensation. Yeah, and because we're all struggling, that gets rolled into what your film is actually going to be producing by end of day, and rightly so. I mean, that's what festivals always should have been, and that's the way we treat festivals. So the fact that you could also get analytical data and know exactly how many views you were going at, you could also set in advance a certain price tag saying, okay, well, we'll give you the film for a flat rate A for X amount of views, and any views beyond that, you have to pay us, say, $1 or $2 per view. Which always seems like a fair shake of the stick if someone's, literally selling those tickets for $11. So I think on a positive end, although it's dreadful once again for filmmakers to have their premiere on a computer screen somewhere, at least it's open this discussion about, economical fairness to rights holders and a sharing of the wealth. And I'm hoping that will carry over.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just to go a little more sideways on this topic of the festivals and screen platforms, I know that some of the larger festivals have created their own proprietary platforms.
Yeah.
And have the capacity to do that, but other festivals have gone the broadcast collaboration route, which then snowballs into a whole distribution conundrum of theatrical release versus broadcast. Can you speak about that conundrum?
Yeah, that's really tricky. Yeah, it was interesting when we first started virtual. I mean, there was very few people doing anything, and everyone was kind of, quote unquote, piggybacking off whoever had started their own platform. Then, understandably so, everyone started investigating to try to find their own way to do it, which makes sense. I mean, without revealing details, I mean, Hot Docs has its own platform, but it made sense because they wanted to unify their ticketing system that already existed with, something that made sense. And because they already had the technology through their own industry screening site, it became a natural for them. And that model can be and should be replicated by everyone out there. I mean, there is something to be said about having control yourself versus a third party who may take fees and who knows about reporting, etc. That's digital. When, you start, you're right. I mean, and even digital opens up its own Pandora's box, of rights and so forth and how that works. Especially if you want to make a big sale to an SVOD platform like Netflix. I mean, will they look at a festival that did digital screenings as being commercial exploitation? I mean, this is an argument that's still going on to this day. Broadcast is a little trickier because broadcast, no offense to any broadcaster out there, I mean, is an older, more archaic, distribution model. And the flexibility or inflexibility in regards to being able to determine when and how to watch it is also, just sticks in people's brains a little bit as being, this is a traditional broadcast. And let's face it, depending on what broadcast partner you are with, you're going to be piggybacking on a very large, already built-in audience. So how do you control the number of views? And that's what broadcasters will never share with you. So whereas digital, we have the ability to look at the analytics to see not only how many people are watching, but to be frank, who's even watching. Broadcasters, we don't. So if you work out a deal with a festival who is launching their films with a broadcaster, I just would have to say that I would hope it's fair compensation. To me, in Canada, the few festivals that have gone this route, from my perspective, I've not seen fair compensation. So I've been very adamantly speaking out saying, I don't think we should do this. But once again, I often defer those decisions to the filmmakers, and because I'm not the expert at. Usually, I'm an expert, but in this weird pandemic, no one's an expert. And the only way that we can sort of figure this stuff out is really sort of as a team, sort of getting together and sort of deciding what is going to be best for the baby going forward. So I'm not against the concept of broadcasting films at a festival, but I think there has to be an understanding that it's a different medium. It's a different way of communicating the films. It's a larger audience for the most part, and there's less control. And within Canada, at least, I can only speak to Canadian films within Canada. Canadian broadcast deals are kind of, dare I say, the creme de la creme for financing your film. And the last thing you want to do is, if you have a broadcaster partner already attached to your film, suddenly give your film to a festival that is attached to a competing broadcaster. And suddenly, God knows what mess would come of that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it becomes more and more complex. yeah, I'm just, this conversation is rolling through my mind in terms of the effects of that financing structure, and the how knowing where your festival's kind of landscape is situated is critically important, so that you don't cross up your commitments to your funding structure or reporting. But what I'm prompted to ask, Robin, is how are success measurements changing?
I need to take a sip of my tea to answer that one, because that's a really difficult question. Uh, you know, I can only speak for myself and our own company. And, that being said, I mean, that doesn't even necessarily mean that I'm representing my filmmakers in the same sense. To give you context, when I get involved in a film, there's usually three questions I ask, or myself as well as the filmmakers. One is, do you love the creative? And if you're not passionate about the creative, then why get involved? The third is there a business model? As much as I like to think of myself as being artist friendly, if I also run a business, and if I don't see an avenue to generate revenue, not just for myself but for the filmmakers, then I'm not going to get involved. The third question I always ask is really what the expectations are. That's of the filmmaker and of myself, and there's no right or wrong answer there. But without having that conversation is kind of like, getting married without having discussion of whether you want children or not prior to. It's there's great movies and great filmmakers that I've not worked with just because I realized I couldn't achieve what they wanted expectation wise, and vice versa. And once again, not to say that their expectations are wrong. It could be all about paying off your mortgage and your credit cards that you've maxed out to make your movie. It could be about just getting the film to a certain audience. Both are equally valid, but without that conversation prior to, it's hard to say. So now in this new world, and I don't think we're quite in the new world yet. I think we're still sailing across the ocean trying to find any sense of land, at this point, because I think we're really kind of lost at sea still. Your measure of success obviously is going to be a financial one. I mean, for a filmmaker and for myself, we have to look at what money has been invested, what investors have invested, and is there going to be recoupment by end of day? That's a pretty constant, like I say, pre-pandemic, during pandemic, post-pandemic. But, on a different level, you can sort of pick what your victories are a little differently. Often I find that just, this is a strange thing to say, but, and I'm not encouraging this, but often when I get an email from just Jane or Joe Public saying that they had watched a film that we represent and they absolutely adored it, that to me is a victory. It may be just one person, and of course we'd love hundreds of people to have that experience. But the fact that someone went out of their way to actually, find an email for me or our company and sent an email in, or vice versa, doing the same thing for the filmmaker, or posting something on social media about it, that's kind of why I got involved in all this, was really to try to bring a filmmaker's vision to an audience. So that's kind of, it's not going to pay my bills. It's definitely not something I'd go to the bank to ask for a loan with. But, that sort of keeps me going, and obviously working on great movies with great filmmakers, charges my battery every day. Obviously, there are always exceptions to the rules, and, I'm always pleasantly surprised. By saying that, I mean, I go into everything I do in distribution kind of, I like to refer to myself as optimistically pessimistic, meaning, I'm not expecting the worst, but if I go in with low expectations, then I'm never going to be disappointed. And then if anything above those low expectations happens, then it's a victory. And it's not to say that I'm degrading the product I'm working on. It's not to say that I think the film will tank and is not going to make any money. It's just, you know, for us to get the movies to the public, we have to work with buyers in between. That's exhibitors, that's broadcasters, that's platforms, that can be educators, that can be buyers for the airlines, whatever the case may be. We can't dictate the terms of what they want and, you know, how much they're going to pay for that. So when we get involved in a film, yes, we have relationships with all of these people, but we can't necessarily predict what they want, you know, because we don't have output deals with these companies. Every film that we get in, we have to sort of grind away and pitch to these people. So weird as it may be, every film that I get involved in, I don't go in expecting to make a TV sale.
Mm.
There's not enough broadcasters in Canada that buy nonfiction feature-length product. So, and it's no slam on the broadcasters. I mean, I have a great relationship with all of them here in Canada, but they also have only so many slots.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not the only distributor, rights holder out there selling their product, selling product. So I sort of look on a business model of how will a film work for us if it doesn't get a broadcast sale in this country, which is still, like I say, one of the larger license fees that you can get on a movie. So if we get a broadcast sale, that becomes a major victory, you know, and dare I say, it becomes icing on the cake. So, and obviously for the filmmaker, it's a great opportunity because it opens their film up to even a larger audience. So it's those sort of things. But on a smaller micro level, if we get a booking, sadly at close, but say at the cinema, the Bytown Cinema in Ottawa, which was one of my favorite independent cinemas in the whole country, so they had to close the doors on December 31st, and they're no longer. They're one of the casualties of the pandemic. But if they booked our film, then that was a victory, because the guy who programmed it was prickly at best, but also had an incredibly discerning taste and knew his audience better than anybody. So if he, quote unquote, chose your film, similar to a programmer at a festival, you got a sense of a curatorial voice giving its stamp of approval on the movie. And you also got a sense that you could make some revenue off this film. So there.
Yes. Wow. And so I'm just sort of recapping the 3 questions that you asked.
Yeah.
Do you love the creative? So that's about the passion that the filmmaker has for the story, yeah, and how they sort of infuse that passion to you, Robin. And then there's the business model criteria. You know, is there basically, is there an audience? Is there a space for this in the marketplace? Mm-hmm. And how do we have a plan for reaching that audience? And then the expectations. And I'm curious about your comment about keeping your expectations low or managing expectations. Is that, do you reckon that is perhaps a symptom of our assessment of where documentaries fit in storytelling, or is it a Canadian limitation of, yeah, the avenues are limited, you know, because of just the size of our population? Yeah. And I guess you might be guessing I'm segueing into the international or more global criteria.
I mean, it's a good question. I'm not 100% sure where it comes from, but I, you know, on the surface, I think it's very Canadian to think that way. You know, I mean, I always joke that Canadians, we don't strive for the gold, we go for the bronze. You know, we're happy to be second or third, you know, except when it comes to hockey, perhaps.
No, never on hockey.
So, you know, but all joking aside, I think it also gets down to, you know, just past experiences where you get involved and you get very, you know, dare I say, high, you know, from the possibilities of what a film can do. And I think every filmmaker or anyone who's involved in a film has gone through that. The problem I always run into is that high of watching the movie and getting excited about it and starting to think about the marketing opportunities, the avenues to where it can go out and who can see it and who the audience is and how we can target the audience. That's kind of the honeymoon phase of when you're looking at a movie. And then I have to kind of sort of slap myself a little bit and say, okay, slow down. Let's think about this a little bit more logically on who the buyers are, who are these middle people that we're going to have to sell the movie to. What are the avenues that we would need to sort of exploit to get to the audiences, more the logistical sort of side of it. And, there's no real answers to those questions I sort of just base it more on experience, beyond from the two companies I've been doing distribution in Canada for God knows how many years, 30 years now, and I've worked for all of the big companies at some point in time. Mm-hmm. And I sort of learned really quickly that, what you think may happen may not happen. And there's nothing incredibly more destructive, on a personal and professional level than to put your eggs all in one basket and then suddenly, find they're all broken. That's a strange metaphor, but, and also on a realistic side, because we want to stay afloat to work on not just one film, but multiple films through, the life of our company, you have to mitigate your risks a little bit too, and make sure that you aren't, everything we do is gambling. There's never a guarantee, which is the weirdest thing, because I am the world's worst gambler and not a gambler by heart, yet I find myself in the heart of a gambling industry. To me, it's about mitigating risk. That's really what distribution in a lot of ways is. It's trying to find the best solid avenues to get a film out to the audience without risking too much, whatever the risk may be. It might be a financial risk, it may be a personal risk, it may be, to be honest, even a contractual, risk. So, when we look at films, we are looking, I always do kind of a pro forma, when I get into that logical phase. After my heart has done palpitations, I go to my head to start jamming numbers. And I just do projections of what I think it will cost to release this film, as well as what it can make in a low, medium, and high perspectives. And if all the numbers work in all three scenarios, then I feel it's worth the risk to go forward. If the only way that I feel that it's going to work is in the high performance scenario, meaning it has to really work, then I'll walk away from it. Historically, I've not always listened to that voice. So it's been the past, and I won't even say mistakes, because I don't think of them as mistakes. It's been the past gambles, the past erroneous evaluations that have really, I wouldn't say jeopardized anything professionally, but just, they just really rock you, where you're just going, why the hell am I doing this? Because, maybe I don't know what the market wants. So you just have to constantly be sort of attuned to that a little bit. And, whether it's a small company or a big company, a profitable company or not so profitable company, no matter what people say, no one knows the answers to those questions. We never know when a film is going to work and it doesn't work. There's always weird anomalies that pop out. We got involved with a film a few years back called Kedi. It's about cats living in Istanbul. And I was just charmed by it. I'm a cat owner, so I kind of got sucked in a little bit that way. We knew the US distributor. They were offering to us for a fair value. And, just we got involved. But I had no idea this film would go on to make the money that it did. And have I shamelessly gone after animal documentaries since then? No, but it does pop into my head every once in a while. So that's the other thing is, when you find success, try not to copy it and emulate it, because, God, I can't believe I'm going to say this phrase, because I had an old boss who said this phrase all the time. It drove me crazy. You can't get lightning in the bottle twice.
That's what I was just thinking, Robin. It was, it's a lightning situation.
Yeah, unfortunately, my old boss said that about every film that we got involved with. It was lightning in a bottle. And it was sort of like, how much lightning can you put in a bottle already? So, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
By the way, this is the same boss who told me the best way to watch, the best way to buy a film is to never watch a film,
Oh,
which is insane.
oh,
But I think what he was trying to instill at that time was a sense of if in a paragraph you cannot entice an audience to be interested in this movie, then how the hell are you ever going to get them into a cinema to watch the movie? I totally disagree. You obviously have to watch the movie, but that's how kooky this boss was.
yeah, it's separating heart and head and all of that sort of
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah, exactly.
Robin, as we're speaking about, your criteria and those success measures, and I'd like to segue into the services, in more detail about your companies and what you get up to, and how our audience might, interact with you, or if there's a place of intersection. And you offer more than just the production and international co-production distribution. There's marketing and promotion and advice and consulting on your menu as well. So could you talk a little bit about the package of
Yeah, I kind of say we do everything except Windows, to use that stereotypical line. Well, because the company historically, KINO Smith for the longest time was just me, working in my basement, literally. Yes, the company grew. We brought on some staff, most of them contractual staff. Blue Ice Docs is a larger company, but once again, we don't have a lot of staff. So, by end of day, we realized, well, on two folds. One was that, we needed to look for revenue in all different places. Secondly, because I have been doing what I've been doing for a long period of time, and although there's not much left up here, there's still little bits here and there that I guess people find useful and valuable. And I can't tell you how often I would be getting emails from people asking for advice. And to be frank, it wasn't even just filmmakers. It was often other distributors or funding agencies. I just realized that, there's often a barrier up with distributors, and let's face it, historically, distributors are notoriously a four-letter word when it comes to filmmakers too, and for right causes. I've always sort of believed in sort of breaking down barriers, and when we get involved with filmmakers, it really, hopefully, knock on wood, we try to always keep the filmmakers involved, and to be frank, we sort of rely on the filmmakers to also be involved because they know the film more intimately than we do, and often they know that they've already made connections to the audiences. So that sort of dialogue and that sort of understanding and knowledge sharing to me has always been part of what I think makes life special. It's not even exclusive to our industry. I am a firm believer that if you do anything in life, if you want to be a filmmaker, you need to know what a cinematographer does, what an editor does, what a gaffer does. You need to know all of those jobs. It's not to say you need to do those jobs, God forbid, but you need to understand the full craft before you do it. When I came out of film school, I had a great understanding of the tools of making a movie, but I had no understanding of the business side. And that's purposely why I started working on the business side, was to learn that side of the business, ideally to go back and make movies. And I realized, nah, that's, not going to happen. And I found a better place on this side. So, we are open to providing advice, and as much as I like to be self-deprecating, as most Canadians like to be, on my knowledge base and my connections, I do realize that through just the work that we've been doing, the markets we've been attending, and the films that we've been getting involved in, that, I do know quite a few people out there. So if we have a Canadian production in our lap that needs an American partner, often, sometimes free of charge or otherwise, we'll help them find a partner. If it's a third party that we don't have any dealings with who comes and knocks on our door and wants some advice, depending on what they're asking for, I'm more than happy to give a little bit of free advice, but after a certain period of time, you have to start charging a little bit of money in return, dare I say. So whether it's a marketing plan or helping find, a distribution company or partners, if it's even about finding a producing partner. Most recently, there's a project that came across my lap from a writer who wanted to make a documentary on the film. And I said, I don't have the bandwidth to produce this, but I can connect you with a producer. And sure enough, connected the project with a Canadian producer. The film has been made and now it's being screened in hot dogs, which is amazing. So even on those sort of little levels, I really sort of enjoy seeing that success happen. But I'm going to say this caveat to anyone who's listening: don't come knocking on my door with a genre movie. I'm a documentary guy, and yes, I have history in working in that realm many years ago, but that's not my expertise. So for anyone who's knocking on anyone's door trying to get either a deal or advice, make sure you're knocking on the right doors, because otherwise it could work against you if you haven't done the research in advance.
Robin, do your companies have equity, diversity, inclusion mandates now? How have you sort of begun to participate in that conversation of inclusion in our industry? Because I have to say, your docs are so wide, like they're wide ranging. The films. So can you speak about that and the mandates of your companies?
Yeah, I mean, to be frank, because we're such a small company, we don't have anything quote unquote written on paper. I'm happy to say that of the staff that we've hired, literally, 65% of our staff over the last 7 years has been a visible minority. I'm not sure if that's the right term to be using anymore. I know it changes all the time. But diversity to me is important, especially considering some of the films that we're working on. What we have actually done quite often, if we get a film that speaks to a certain cultural or religious or demographic sector, we'll hire somebody to help us with outreach who knows that sector inside and out. It's often the best way to approach, if you're taking someone who is not from, say, the South Korean community, and trying to do outreach for a South Korean film to that community, it's a little bit more difficult. And, the sensitivities of understanding how to dive in are not necessarily as readily available. So, yeah, I think that's really where we stand. We don't have a mandate. I don't, to be frank, I just have not felt like we've needed one, because we are a company of 2-3 people, so, and it's that unto myself is sort of like, okay, well, we could mandate it, but, it's in my mind all the time anyways, so.
Exactly. It's part of your MO. It's part of why you tell stories, or why you love what you do, it seems. Can we talk a little bit more about audience consumption of content? Because we looked at it from the filmmaker's perspective. We talked about it from the festival's perspective. Can you, now we're sort of drilling into that. You mentioned bringing on experts in possible cultural expertise and that sort of thing. Where and how are audiences consuming content these days, and how do you find that intel? What, not to give away too many of your trade secrets, but
yeah.
But what's that audience consumption looking like for us now? And
yeah, it's a hard thing to really determine. Once again, getting back to sort of virtual screenings or festival screenings, that's kind of, it's nice in a lot of sense, because you do get to see the analytics, but the analytics only go so deep. You're not necessarily getting a concept of, if they're watching it, are they watching it at home on a TV or on a tablet on the road, or hopefully no one's on the road during the pandemic, but or sometimes you don't even know necessarily geographically where those people are. So as much as analytics is kind of the savior word a lot of people throw around, there's a lot of loopholes and pitfalls in that don't give us the information we need. Ironically, when you played a film at a cinema, you kind of got a better understanding of how people were consuming and what type of people were consuming it too, especially if you had the opportunity of going to the cinema directly. But the reports you would get from the cinema usually gave you a pretty good, accurate scenario. They wouldn't give you the demographics, but either way. You know, as we know, the subscription VOD platforms are very mysterious about their numbers. The SVOD platforms, protecting their data. I'm not going to argue against it. I'm also not going to argue for it. I mean, it's a bit of it's a tricky situation. I mean, I think we all want to know how many people are watching our film and who they are, and hopefully connect to it. You know, one of the problems we actually ran into, I'm starting back into virtual cinema, you know, when we start our platform, obviously we get emails of everyone who is buying a ticket through our platform. Now, legally, we cannot be soliciting to them directly without their consent. But, you know, consistently we were being asked by filmmakers and, for that matter, exhibitors who we were partnering with for that information. It's like, no, we can't give you that information. I know you would like to know that information, but legally we cannot give you that information, nor can we do anything with that information. In fact, we had one cinema that almost didn't want to play with us because they felt like we would just steal their members list. And it was like, yeah, no, not part of our agenda. Yeah, I mean, it's hard. I mean, I would have said pre-pandemic, you know, especially when it comes to nonfiction within Canada. I mean, we were really seeing a strong revival of the theatrical cinematic setting for documentaries, you know. Not only do we have dedicated cinemas and festivals that are dealing with nonfiction, but a lot of the tried and true independents and even some of the more commercial cinemas were starting to dive into that realm. I think that's going to change a little bit because documentaries, as mentioned, for the most part, skew to an older demo. I mean, obviously, if you got a documentary like Minding the Gap that we had, or Warren Miller snow, you know, I call them snow porn movies, you know, those have their own niche as well. But an older audience, were the ones who were really gravitating to the independent cinemas. You know, a younger demographic from what we were seeing was really gravitating to a digital cinema for nonfiction, that is, you know, and I can't talk about fiction. You know, so that became historically part of our release plan, that if we had a film like Minding the Gap, we really pushed up the digital release versus the theatrical release. We had a film like The Woman Who Loves Giraffes that had a very long, healthy theatrical release because we knew it would do enormously well there. The paradigm's going to shift a lot, you know. I mean, even with cinemas opening, there's still a fear of going to cinemas and crowded places, and that fear, I think, is more instilled and more entrenched in an older demographic than a younger demographic. Will cinemas change the way they program as well is also going to change. You know, we've not seen a huge, robust incline digitally on nonfiction during the pandemic. I mean, we've seen, yes, a lot of content being purchased and streamed, but not necessarily exponentially more nonfiction content. And what nonfiction content we're seeing tends to be more serial and sensationalized. So, and broadcasters, for better or for worse, I mean, you know, the holes that fell into their programming due to things like the Olympics being canceled or otherwise weren't always filled with what I would have thought was the obvious choice for the demographic fits of who they were.
Possibly, yes.
Yeah, so it's tricky. I'm not quite sure exactly when and where people are watching films. The only place I'm guaranteed people are watching films are on airplanes. What else are you going to do, for goodness sake? I joke, but I mean, this is kind of an age-old question that I don't think really has an exact answer unless you, in the old days, you used to have seat counters. You used to go to cinemas, you know. This was, even when I worked at Alliance, when I first started, there was representatives for Alliance that lived in all of the major cities. So when local theater A, let's say in Saskatoon, opened a movie, they'd have the seat counter quietly go to the cinema and count the number of people and do a quick little demographic profile on who was seeing it. Now, that was great marketing information, but of course it was used for more business tactics when the exhibitors sent the report in, and suddenly the numbers were a lot lower than what the seat counter was. And I can't tell you how often that happened. It happened quite often. There was a little mess to clean up, let's just say.
Yeah.
So one would think in the digital realm you'd be able to capture more information and get a better sense of how people are consuming it. You're not. Where I think we're going to see more information come in the digital realm is through memberships, because once people have trusted your curatorial voice or your brand, they're happy and willing to become a member of that organization because they trust the voice. It's not dissimilar to buying a membership card to your local cinema as well, or subscribing to your favorite TV channel. Memberships, strange as it may be for cinemas have been decimated across the board, and virtual cinema has not been putting money in their pockets. But from my conversation, not only with independent cinemas in Canada, but also independent cinemas and distributors around the world, is membership prices have really skyrocketed during the pandemic. Yeah. Not prices, sorry, membership enrollment has skyrocketed.
Enrollment, okay. I was thinking, prices of that would be...
not prices, that's the totally wrong message, but the enrollment has been. Now that's probably not dissimilar to, once again, everybody wanting to roll up their sleeves and help their locals, how can I help business A or business B? I can become a member, put a little money in their pocket and off to the races. That to me is really encouraging because A, it shows that there's still a connection. There's still obviously engagement, and there's a passion there that still exists. And if anything, hopefully we'll roll out of this pandemic or slide out of it or crawl out of it, however you want to see. And there will be a larger trust factor, with audiences to whoever is displaying, consuming the films. There's a lot of content out there right now. And the biggest problem is there isn't, and you said it well, there isn't enough curatorial voices to that content. Algorithms don't do it, What do it are brands or programmers, actual real people who are putting their name or their company name behind it, saying, this is something we can get behind. In normal circumstances, we would have put this through or cinema or a festival or whatever the case may be. But in this case, we're going to do it this way. We're still going to put a brand behind it and off to the races. So I hope that trust and that passion between both the patron and the exhibitor, I'd say exhibitor, but I don't mean it just to be cinemas, becomes more robust and more, strange word to use, but more intimate going out of the pandemic. So.
Yeah. It just brings me to the question of the power of audience choice and finding audience, and with genre, let's say, or a curator that is in a genre space, that the audience knows what they're going to get because of the genre short form of, okay, I'm going to get a horror here, I'm going to get fantasy there, rom-coms, drama, etc. In documentary, how do you categorize and how do you reach audience, because the subject matter is so wide and varied to curate on documentary? I mean, the National Film Board is an example, I guess, if you will, because they've created their own platform, their own space, and curated it. But what are your thoughts, Robin, about reaching such a diversified audience and reaching them where they hang out? And I'm not just talking about the theater, I'm talking about subject matter wise, where they hang out.
Yeah. I mean, historically, once again, I used to work in both and distribute fiction and nonfiction. And don't get me wrong, I still love fiction. But I really gravitated to nonfiction for a bunch of reasons. But one of the reasons I did was, rule number one when you're getting involved in a movie, and I would say this even for filmmakers as you're conceiving your film, is to think of who that core audience is. I think you don't want to be thinking about the large audience, and God forbid you give the answer that everyone will love my movie, because you know what, that will never happen. But you have to think about who that core target audience is that are going to be quote unquote the champions of your film. They're going to be the the early adopters. They're going to be the people who are going to be spreading the word on your behalf about your film. As a filmmaker progresses in the film, the best thing for them to do is to engage with those core audience people as early as possible, to let them know this subject, aka film, is being made. Even engage with them for feedback, advice, whatever the case may be. So when your film is ready, aka the baby is ready to be born, there's already a palpable, salivating audience that is ready to consume this. Now, you may be preaching to the choir, to a certain degree. The core audience often are people who know the details of the story or your narrative or your character intimately. But it doesn't matter. They're still, I use the analogy that if you're a collector, you're never going to overlook anything that's presented to you that could be part of your collection. I mean, you're going to look at it all. So what I love about documentaries is they are often, I say often, not always, often they're a lot easier to discern who that core audience is, and that's everything from age to gender to location, geographical locations. It even gets into weird things like what are their buying habits, what are their psychographic, lifestyle choices. It seems kind of analytical, but actually writing all that information out early, and even for me, when I'm looking at a film, writing that stuff out early and figuring out who that core audience is, helps me determine where they are, first and foremost, and how they consume product, which is, once again, not easy to figure out. But on a very superficial level, if a film appeals to a young demographic versus an old demographic, then chances are the majority of them are going to want to consume this film digitally versus that in a cinema. So as you figure out who that core audience is, and for that matter, demographically, you can take a look at this country through, StatsCan or whatever the case may be to figure out where that audience actually exists. That helps you map out a release strategy. And that idea can be taken on a global level as well, and can also help you determine what kind of festivals you're going to get involved in, what kind of partners, distribution, broadcast, or otherwise you want to work with. So to me, that's always the backbone of any movie, fiction or non-fiction. Fiction is often much harder to figure those details out, it appeals to, male and female, 25 to 55, it's, whereas, there may be a core subject matter or a theme or an issue. And it's not just about people. Then you can sort of branch out and start looking at organizations that you can tie into, that deal with some of these issues or are interacting with the type of characters that are in your film. And those organizations can therefore then become not only promotional partners, but they may even become distribution partners. This is not the best example, but when we had the booksellers out, yes, we partnered with cinemas, but because we were just sending them a URL link to click through and watch the movie, it suddenly dawned on me, it's like, well, we don't have to limit ourselves to just cinemas. I mean, you could go to literally anyone or anyone out there that has some sort of database or mailing list. And because it was booksellers, we thought bookstores, well, click in with bookstores and do it with bookstores. So there's some interesting avenues that do open up that way. And you just have to make sure that as a distributor, you try not to think, block here, block there, cookie cutter. And every film is kind of a little different from each other. And you have to treat it as such. You're not always successful at doing that, but you have to try to build a model that will sure have similar elements to every other release that you've done, but hopefully in regards to your marketing or your outreach, or just even the way you put your key campaign elements together, your poster, your trailer, you want to make sure all of those speak to who that core demo is, and hopefully engage that core demo whether it be, once again, persons or companies, to help propagate the word. And often that can be done with zero to no money, which is the beauty of it too. And that's where I don't want to shoot myself in the foot, but that's where DIY self-distribution can kick in. And I don't suggest every filmmaker to do it because it's a lot of work, but I do suggest that every filmmaker do it, because it is a lot of work. It gets back to what I said earlier, which is to really do what you're doing properly. You really need to have a good facet and understanding of all elements of what you're doing. DIY self-distribution can be an incredibly infuriating process, but it can also be immensely rewarding. The one caveat I tell every filmmaker who thinks about doing this is be prepared for the next 3 years of your life to be sucked away. And if you've got another project that you want to start working on, you will have to park that and start looking at that 2 to 3 years down the road. So that's the biggest sacrifice I always tell them about.
Yeah, absolutely. And that leads me to the notion of event screenings and community engagement and screenings. One of the watchwords or watch phrases that Telefilm now has perpetuated in their applications is a community engagement plan, and so that dovetails into this DIY. How much is in the realm of the filmmaker pre-relationship with the distributor, and how much, where does the filmmaker end and the distributor begin, kind of in that relationship?
Yeah, once again, I can only speak from my own experience, and I'm sure every distributor has a different answer for this. I'd like to be involved as early as possible. When I say involved, I don't mean telling you how to cut your movie. I mean, I rarely give notes to films unless filmmakers ask me to. The only thing I always say is don't shoot the dog. Don't shoot the dog, whatever you do. That's my sort of joke of saying, don't cross the line. But when it comes down to strategizing festival screenings or community screenings, it's a real slippery slope. One innocent little community screening in a major market that accidentally or otherwise gets publicized on a wide basis can really damage a release. Putting your film in a small little local festival may damage your ability of getting your film into a larger festival. So whether it's a distributor or a sales agent or a producer rep or just a sort of a wise old person on the corner down the street, getting the advice of someone in regards to all this stuff, I think is really important. And working in a vacuum is really difficult, especially for filmmakers who often have put so much time and energy in making their movie and they're right at the finish line. And the first thing they want to do is get it into a festival. And I get that. But there's a strategy involved in that. In fact, there's people around the world who make a business out of helping filmmakers strategize that. I actually just been dealing with a film that we have that was accepted into a bunch of festivals last year, and we all mutually agreed to postpone it because of COVID. But this year we decided, we can't wait any longer. Once again, that was mostly the filmmakers making the decision, but I supported 100%. So as we started diving into, quote unquote, revising a release strategy around the movie, and no fault to the filmmaker, I suddenly realized that they had promised the film to all these film festivals. Some starting now, some starting at the end of this year. And yet there is a finite time for us to sort of release this film before it ended up on a broadcast network. And as much as, it killed me, I had to have a conversation with them to say, we can't do these festivals in the third and fourth quarter of the year, because how am I supposed to release this movie? I mean, you're asking me to release this movie, get behind it, put a certain amount of money behind it, and yet you want me to be transparent about that, but yet you've had these conversations and booked the film into festivals within the territory that technically I actually own, and yet you've not even had a conversation with me. So, I love them dearly and still do. Yeah, and we got it figured out, but it was just kind of one of those. I chalk it up to a weird pandemic moment where, their excitement sort of exceeded themselves and they didn't think it through. Um, but all it took was for one or two conversations and a couple of emails, and suddenly we were all back in sync. So it's just about communicating, for the most part. I know that sounds so boring and really obvious, but God, the lack of communication that sometimes takes place in our industry is mind-boggling, and guaranteed 80% of the problems occur from that.
Yeah.
When it comes down to community screens, I'm a huge fan of those. To be frank, historically, once again, when we did theatrical releases, there was no screening that was too small for us. If it was off a DVD in a church basement for 30 people, and they can only afford to pay a $50 screening fee, as long as it didn't cost me $50 to get the DVD to them, I'd agree to do it. Because it is, once again, about getting the film to people to watch, to communicate, to learn, whatever the case may be. And listen, you get enough of those community screenings together, it creates word of mouth. It creates some revenue. The success that we had on the film, The Woman Who Loves Giraffes, A, we wouldn't have that success with the filmmaker's help. But B, we wouldn't have had that success without all of these small little community screenings that we did throughout the whole life of the film, and that are still doing to this day.
Yes. And so to say, I think that has a long tail, that particular.
Yeah.
No pun intended, because giraffes don't typically have long tails. But I'm very proud to say that Allison is one of our WIDC alumni. So I'm a little bit more familiar with that title, and really quite excited about the audience reach that the film has achieved. And in that sense, looking at women scientists and nature lovers and all of those kinds of demographics, if you will,
had so many elements to it. I've known Allison for a while. I'm also, I love to work with people more than once, ideally. I haven't worked with Allison before, but I've known her, and I've kind of been privy to her early releases. I know quite well as a friend her producer. So when this project sort of came to me at early development stage, it was a bit of a home run for me. It's like, how could you not get involved in this project? It's this wonderful woman that we should all know about, and giving her the spotlight that she deserved. But it's also about animal conservation. It's also about, dare I say, sexism in the academic realm. There were so many lovely nuances to this story. And of course, visually, it had giraffes. Really, come on now. And cats with Ketty and giraffes with this. But that being said, it was also an easy one to figure out who the audience would be on many different levels. And, once you start with that core audience with that movie, you started splintering off and finding secondary and tertiary, audiences that would buy into it as well. So, but once again, my hat's off to the filmmakers. They rolled up their sleeves, they did an awesome job. I always say with films like that, it was a co-release. Sure, we released it and distributed and had great success with it, but it wouldn't have happened with the filmmakers like Allison being involved in it. So
that's so cool, Robin. Thank you. I realize we've just gabbed on here, and I've forgotten to call for questions. So Female Eye Film Festival team behind the scenes, if you have questions stacking up there, please shoot them to us, because I have two more questions for Robin, and it's a two-parter. What keeps you up at night, and what gives you hope?
God, what keeps me up at night is actually, it's a funny answer. It's actually kind of guilty pleasure time. It's time to watch non-documentaries, catch up on silly streaming TV shows, or binge watching something. Because my email is down, my phone is quiet, and things are quiet. It's just kind of there. Where I get my problem is waking up too early in panic mode, thinking about work stuff, which is my least favorite thing in the world. I find myself at 4 o'clock in the morning awake, working out business issues in my head. I wish it was the opposite way around. And sorry, what was the second question? You said, what gives me hope?
The hopeful one, yeah.
Hopeful one. The documentary industry as a whole, I have hope because, I've seen that genre, if we want to call it a genre, grow exponentially. And let's face it, getting quote unquote real stories into our lives is becoming more and more difficult through more traditional sources. And I think people recognize that and they want to dive into real stories more often. This is just me sort of spitballing, but that's my feeling. Hope for our industry here in Canada is maybe not as elevated. I do worry about our industry here in Canada. I get very concerned about some of the business practices that have been happening during this pandemic. It's become a bit of a Wild West out there, and there's no sheriff in town, so to speak. Honoring borders and rights has kind of broken down in this grand old world of globalization. The amount of unsanctioned content that we've seen leak into Canada that we own the rights to on a regular basis has been happening almost weekly. We've had a bad habit of really letting, I'm going to beat up on the Americans, and why not, letting the Americans dictate our industry up here for a very long time. The Americans are allowed to sell directly to our Canadian broadcasters. They're allowed to put digital feeds out here, left, right, and center through iTunes or otherwise. They are infiltrating our Canadian library system with American DVD copies. They are selling films to Air Canada to go on airlines. I'm not saying that none of this is illegal. I'm just saying, protecting our industry really stems from protecting where the revenue ends up by end of day. If the money is ending up in American pockets versus Canadian pockets, whoever those pockets may be, not saying mine, could be filmmakers' pockets, could be anyone's, then we're kind of killing ourselves. And that's I've actually spent, I call it my pandemic hobby. I've been spending far too much time online policing this stuff.
Wow.
And I'm going through a process right now, which I can't really dive into because I'm getting lawyers involved with it as well. I'm trying to get some change out there. So I'm trying to make a stand when it's really frustrating to see that there's much larger companies with lots deeper pockets that just don't give a damn, So
I wanted to ask you a question about torrent sites. So speaking, kind of dovetailing on what you're talking about, it's Leslie from the Female Eye. I paid a lawyer a lot of money to get my film off torrent sites.
Yeah.
Only to find it back up a week later. But the funny thing was, it didn't hurt a sale to Sky Arts,
Yeah.
and it didn't hurt. But what it, and there was great audience, like live stuff coming from the people who are watching my pirated film. So what advice, I gave up and I just said, you know what, it's going to get pirated. It's going to end up somewhere. What can I do? A great panel, by the way. Thank you so much, Robin and Carol.
Oh, my pleasure.
So really, there is nothing we can do right now. There's nothing we can do about pirates and
it's really difficult. There are corporations globally now, companies that you can hire that will do this work for you, but they cost a mint to do this. And of course the studios use them. Not to belittle your problem, Leslie Ann, but I have a funny story. When I worked with Young Chang on Up the Yangtze many years ago, I remember getting a phone call. There's a place just up in Markham that's kind of notorious called Pacific Mall. For anyone in the Greater Toronto area, of this place is where there's not one authentic piece of anything in this mall.
I've been there. I bought a pair of earrings there erroneously many years ago.
Yes. And everything just has one letter off. Instead of a Rolex, you're buying a Rolex. I got a call from him because he was up in Pacific Mall, and he says, you know, I've made it. And I said, what are you talking about? He says, I'm actually a real filmmaker now. And I said, what are you talking about? And he said, my film Up the Yangtze is in all of the bootleg DVD stores. And he actually saw it as a badge of honor. And, you know, there, you know, once again, I'm not trying to belittle the problem, but there's something to be said about that, you know, that, you know, if people want to see your film so much so that they will pirate it, you know, then that means that you're tapping into something. And in some cases, you know, BitTorrent sites or otherwise can create that audience that we were talking about that you can tap into. There have been very few, but there have been a few examples of films that got passed over by distributors left, right, and center, then went through the whole piracy issue and suddenly created this audience and this demand that then it brought in an established distribution deal after the fact. Crazy stories.
Yeah.
Long and short of it is, though, yeah, I mean, you can go blue in the face trying to stop it. I think often I find that if you are dealing with an individual versus a company and you'll let them know that you're the filmmaker, you know, it's great that they're passionate about it, but you know, it's biting into your bottom dollar, then you might find some polite people out there who will help out or connect you or even create a community that may help you out.
Okay.
But yeah, it's a never-ending cycle, and it's going to get worse.
Well, you know, Robin, what's funny about that? It was this bittersweet thing because I was like copying and pasting and trying to capture. I was thinking this is great critical response from like the average consumer.
Yeah.
So at one point I was kind of elated, and on the other hand I was horrified. And then I started chiming in and saying, "Hi, I'm the director," and then a whole bunch of people scattered. People just disappeared. But it was an interesting, you know, journey, and I certainly took away from this panel the need to really have a plan and work with people who know. You know, I kept the rights to my documentary. I'm not trying to make this about me. I got a international sales agent, and then they sold the film to an international distributor, which has done well. But I kept the rights to Canada, and I'm telling you, Melody Makers, I think you saw it, Robin. I'm sitting on this film, a short version and a longer version, the director's cut, and I'm like, I'm not a distributor. It's sitting parked in my whatever space in Canada.
Yeah.
And I'm going, that was not the right thing to do. So I'm kind of now backtracking, and after the festival, I really need to look at, you know, what I can do, because I have a really cool app for it too that's really interactive.
Yeah.
You know, whatever.
Crazy. I hate to say it, unfortunately, you're probably not the only filmmaker who has a film kind of, dare I say, lingering and collecting dust out there.
Right.
You know, and no offense to you or any of the filmmakers. I mean, the problem is there's not a lot of avenues here in Canada.
No.
You know, I always say this to anyone who's making a movie who's based here in Canada is, yeah, it's great to make a Canadian story for Canadian audiences, but you know what? We're 2% of the global market. 2%. Yeah. You know,
right.
If you want to communicate your story, try to think more globally, you know, or if you're making a regional story, just keep your expectations as being regional, you know.
Right. What if you made a film, but it's not even about your country? I mean, it is international.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just the whole thing. And you know, it was a funder who gave promotional marketing for it and said, keep your rights to Canada. And I'm like, okay, because you've already sold it to broadcaster. Anyway, there's a lot of mixed messages is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
A lot.
Yeah, there's a real battle over dominance in our marketplace right now. You know, you know, the broadcasters are the power brokers. You know, they have the largest sum of money, and then with kick-ins from things like the Canadian Media Fund, equity, or TOPA, or otherwise, it really puts a very large stamp on the films. And, you know, I'm not going to argue this. I'm not going to get into this. But, you know, broadcasters are taking more than broadcast rights, which they're totally allowed to do. I just think that if a broadcaster takes rights, they got to exploit those rights.
Yeah.
You know, too often I see these rights being taken and no one doing anything with them. You know, which I find to be somewhat nefarious at best. You know,
Mhm.
it's like, oh, so you want just exclusivity on this platform, so you took all the platforms away to make sure people see it this way.
Right.
I can't prove that, nor am I really pointing a finger at a company or any company, but that's my gut feeling about a lot of this. There's a lot of puffing of chest going on right now of who's really going to be in control. I mean, I had a conversation, remain nameless with who, but with a buyer in our country who said, I'm really tired of distributors taking all the bows. And I was like going, who the hell's taking any bows? I mean, we're all struggling here. Like, you know, and I just thought that was just the most ludicrous thing to say because, you know, this isn't really about bows, you know? I mean, on a very superficial level, it's a business. On a really more sort of artistic, passionate level, it's about the art. You
Mhm.
know, if I'm doing this to self-congratulate myself, I'd be working in the fiction world, not the
Yeah.
nonfiction world, where red carpets and limos are kind of part and parcel of the whole deal. You know,
Well,
so
I'm glad you're
it's just
not because
spooky.
you're
It's
doing
just people.
amazing things
Yeah.
in the documentary landscape, um, internationally. So kudos to you for
Oh,
Blue
thank
Ice
you.
and KINO Smith,
Yes,
honestly.
absolutely.
Oh, my pleasure. Oh, listen, I wouldn't be here without great people around me. I have a great team of people. I've had great mentors. And I've worked with amazing filmmakers. I mean, I honestly, you're only as good as that. And to me, to have filmmakers trust to work with me over these years, you know, I think of them as family. Sure, some of them have become a little despondent, and so have I. You know, but that's what happens with families. Some people
Mhm.
get close, other people's not. But you know, it's been a real fun ride, and hopefully we'll continue going that way. I love the art form. I love documentaries. I love participating in things like this. And hopefully, you know, I'll love some of the projects that come my way out of this as well. So,
Thank you. And just
No
due
doubt.
to compensation for people's time, you will be receiving an honorarium for your time. I really appreciate it very much. We really do.
well, I will hold my female eye mug high into the glass. Thanks.
Yes, and Ontario Creates, I don't know if I acknowledged them at the beginning, but they've
Oh, my
supported our
apologies. Yeah,
industry initiatives programs, thankfully, and they were very grateful for that. And again, very grateful having you on this
yeah.
in this intimate conversation with Dr. Carol Whiteman. Carol, I love you. Let's keep going. How many years has it been that we've been jumping on each,
Oh, I
partnering?
think it's probably 12 or 13 now, Leslie Ann. I have
Wow.
to tell you. It's a while.
Yeah, it's been a long time. Really great conversation today. I
Yeah.
want to thank you both again very, very much. And Robin, you will be getting a promo code, although there are only one documentary you might really love that's screening at TIFF, Digital Bell Lightbox, this weekend is Beyond the Clouds. And it's
Mm,
a beautiful, not a long, about just under 60-minute documentary about Marian Hansel, who passed away sadly this past year. But there's a few very, very good documentaries. I think there's a handful of docs, maybe
awesome.
three.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you'll
Awesome.
be getting a promo code for a VIP pass, and I hope you take advantage of it. You can watch films from Friday right through to Monday morning at 9 a.m. Yeah,
That's
so watch for
I'll take
that.
a break to eat every once in a while. But it sounds fantastic. Thank you so much for that. And thank you, Carol. It's been a
Yes.
great conversation.
Yes, thank
Mhm.
you, Robin. It has been. I really have thoroughly enjoyed having this conversation with you, and thank you for responding so articulately to all my questions. I've really appreciated this time with you, and thank you,
Yeah.
again, Leslie Ann.
Yeah.
Thank you. It was great. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Stay well.
You bet. Be safe.
Yeah,
Yes, you as
take
well.
care.